Hi everyone, what you're about to listen to is an interview that I did with Amir Taaki during my time in Lisbon Blockchain Week, which we did in person. So what you'll notice is that the sound is going to be a little bit different since we were doing it inside and in an open space. So I just wanted to let you know beforehand. In case you don't know Amir, he was one of the very first Bitcoin developers back in the very beginning of Bitcoin, and was actually one of the first more prominent left-wing figures in the Bitcoin space. So the conversation that we had was pretty interesting. He also started a new project called DarkFi, which I would highly recommend checking out, including the presentation that he gave during Liscon or just going directly to the DarkFi manifesto. As you would probably also be able to tell, he is a prominent advocate for privacy and anonymity on the internet. So the conversation that we have is really, really interesting. And so if you enjoy the interview or find the content that I make important, I'd recommend subscribing to the podcast, leaving a review, sharing it with a friend, or joining the crypto leftist communities on Discord or Reddit. You can also pitch into my efforts starting at $3 a month on patreon.com/theblockchainsocialist to help me out and join the newest patrons like Louise, Jakob, Ayad, and Ling Chi Yang. Any amount really helps since making this stuff isn't free in terms of money or time, and as a patron you'll get a shout out on an episode like I just did and access to Patreon exclusive content like Q&A episodes where you can submit and vote on questions you'd like me to answer, and I'll give my thoughts in roughly 20 minutes. In the latest Patreon Q&A episode, I actually just gave a review of my experience at the Lisbon Blockchain Week. Of course, I'll still be making free content like this interview to help spread the message that blockchain does not need to be used to further entrench capitalist exploitation if we put our efforts into it. So if that message resonates with you, I hope you'll consider helping out. So yeah, thanks a lot, and I hope you enjoy this interview with Amir Taaki.
Completely dressed in like tight silver clothes with like
1 inch.
Was that 1 inch?
Yeah.
Oh, that was kind of gross, to be honest. Like,
Yeah, it was pretty very,
it was pretty shocking.
Stereotypical, like misogynistic tech bro type
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. Yeah.
And they were.
But it's like people are like, yeah, we're changing the world. Yeah, we're like helping people, and it's like, dude, like. But there is there is a certain like hypocrisy where everybody is very wealthy.
Yeah.
But so like people kind of pay. I'd say people pay homage, or there's like a certain. It's in the same way that like Donald Trump, when he came to power, he like used the language of Occupy, the language of radicalism, but it was just language. And the thing is, people often kind of confuse like radical sounding language with actual like radical philosophy. And there are a lot of kind of movements that make use of this. So people just kind of take them at face value, and it's completely the same in crypto. So you see like there is like a certain way of talking, or like certain like, you know, catchy words or phrases that if you say like
Decentralization.
Yeah, for example, decentralization or like, you know, social good or whatever, you know, like, or cypherpunk ideals.
Yeah.
You say you just say some things and people like accept you into that crowd, you know.
Right.
So
it's like saying a passphrase to like get into the club a little bit, but everybody knows the passphrase anyways.
Yeah, exactly. It's like there's some secret kind of codes, but I wouldn't call them symbols, because like a symbol is something that has like more deeper meaning attached to it. So we could say that these used to be symbols, but they've been like turned into signs. So there's this like kind of sign language that people are like constantly signing to. Yeah. Like some people call that like virtue signaling. So there's all this like signaling that's happening. But you strip that away and there's like nothing there that remains except some kind of like nihilism. And that's why you see this new super rich class where they kind of, and you see it in ETH where people pretend that they hate money or that money is bad, yet at the same time they live like incredibly like decadent lifestyles where you go to these conferences. Some of the parties are like cost like upwards of 200K, like just for one night of a party where everybody's like really super high on different loads of substances, and as you said, like the whole bro culture thing with the women and stuff like that. So I feel like if you have wealth and you're kind of you have that responsibility, and you have a philosophy, there is going to be always like a certain part of you which is going to be dedicated to that philosophy. So you're going to kind of want to maximize your impact and effect. And the problem is that there is this misguided idea that we can do the revolution, but we can have fun at the same time. But actually, they're two separate things. So like it's important to like divide a line. And if people want to have fun, they can have fun, but like they shouldn't delude themselves into thinking that they're doing the revolution. Actually, they're taking themselves away from doing the revolution. To do the revolution, it's a hard work. It takes like discipline. It takes dedication. Ultimately, we're doing it because there's like the reward or like the promise of like more vibrant, stronger society.
Yeah. Perfect. And like I had like so many people say that they were working for like big tech before, and they like the money, but they didn't feel like morally okay with what they were doing, and so now they've gone into crypto, where they feel like they can do both at the same time. They can do something that is with what they feel is like better for the public good, or like socially, like they can handle moralistically, that they feel that they're a part of some like political movement, and also get rich at the same time. It's sort of like it felt to me just like a very like liberal like type of belief that you can have your cake and eat it too, type of thing.
That's something from Silicon Valley, which is, I can make $1 million and change the world at the same time. Actually, in terms of the left, the kind of the worst thing that happened to the left is, I think, kind of in the 60s, it was a very kind of mixed time. You had like a lot of very good collective kind of socialist movements, political movements. For example, the anti-war protests, they were very organized. They went every day protesting in a systematic way, knocking doors, and actually managed to stop that war. But at the same time, you had the whole kind of acid culture, and that individualism kind of crept in, and from like my perspective, kind of destroyed the left, and that's why we've ended up in 2003 with the Iraq War. In London, we had the biggest demonstration in England since World War II. There was, I think, 2 million people on the streets of London, like a huge amount of people. But the main slogan of that demonstration was "Not in my name." There's like people were like, there's like a reflection of people going, I don't want to bear responsibility for this war. So it was more of like a statement that like, I don't approve of it. And then that was it. That was the end of, they did that protest, and that was the end of that activism. So, and that did not stop the Iraq War. The Iraq War continued. Yeah. So it's kind of an indictment of the modern left where, it's, and I give another example is in England, we have the 5th of November protest every year, and literally tens of thousands of people from all over England like come down on this day. It takes an entire year to organize this protest, and you go to the protest and there are so many different flags, so many different causes. There's people with music speakers dancing. It's like a bit of a music festival. People happy and partying, and there's a big march all the way from Parliament Square to Trafalgar Square, and you know, they do that long march. It takes like a couple of hours. It's not that long. It's quite short actually, but it takes 2 hours because it's a lot of people. And then they get to Trafalgar Square and the police show up, and then that's it. People go home. So it's like that. Yeah, yeah. So as opposed to like, you know, going there and there will be a stage and, you know, some speakers who like seed ideas and then, you know, maybe give direction. You know, okay, we had this big expression of, you know, popular politics, but like now let's like continue this, or let's like transfer this energy into the next stage. That's kind of what's missing. And having been in activist politics since I was very young, like 15 or so, and you know, and then also revolutionary politics, it's always there's some kind of new trendy, or it's like the left is so focused on catching people's attention through, you know, slogans or like catchy concepts. There's very little like intellectual development. There's a certain attitude among like a large section of the left where it's like, oh, I don't need to read books, like a certain like anti-intellectualism. The movement has really suffered because there is a lack of philosophical development. And what ends up happening is that everybody's an individual, but nobody is individuated, which means that is that the mass is susceptible to psychological operations, perception management, and infiltration by liberal forces, and ends up being manipulated by power because there's no sense of coherency, no shared ideals. It's very easy to use divide and conquer tactics. And it always happens that there is like some new interesting thing that comes up. Everybody gets excited. Everybody starts moving, starts saying, come on, let's go. Let's start doing this thing. And, you know, there's a lot of like movement and energy and then eventually it starts to get into that phase where you need to work in a systematic way. And because there's a lack of strategy or long-term planning, you know, there's things start to get misdirected, and you know, people start to lose energy, and then the whole thing kind of starts to break down, and this cycle like repeats on these very short like boom bust cycles, and what ends up happening is after like, you know, a decade or 2 decades, the people who used to be very political, they start to like move to the countryside and say, oh, I'm going to make a commune and, you know, we're going to have kids. And then they like actually end up breaking away from activism or revolutionary politics. So we actually have to not keep repeating the same mistakes. We have to actually not just keep doing the same thing over and over again. We actually should like look and see like, okay, like maybe we should try something else. And whenever I talk to people about the need for strategy, the need for reorientating like how we do politics or like how we engage politics, people take it very personally, and they say that like they take it like a criticism of themselves, and so. But it's a big problem because the left right now is in a very weakened state, and the what's happening, especially in Europe, but also worldwide, is the rise of these highly organized, like neo-feudalist kind of political blocs. Like you see it with Austria and Slovakia and Poland and Vox in Spain. I also saw a video recently which is very interesting by Vice. I'd search it. It's called Italy's fascist squat. And they have a squat.
A fascist squat.
Yeah, fascist
Oh
squat. It's amazing. Like they go in this squat and it looks exactly like a leftist squat, but it's got all the fascist symbols instead of the classic leftist one. But it's the same kind of style, except it's very clean, and looks and they've got posters up everywhere. And I can totally imagine that if I was a young Italian guy, there's like looking to like, I want to do something in this world, I would totally be attracted by that. I'd be like, that is, they're doing something, they're like changing something, and I'd be like, because that's ultimately why we get attracted to politics. It's like we feel there's something wrong with the world, and we want to change things. We want to remake the order of how things are done. So, and that's a healthy impulse for humans to have. That's that's how life grows and expands. Expands its influence. I think the left has got too much trapped in this idea of hanging out, and having fun. So that's why people always talk about communities or communes, and what they mean is not like actually economically productive centers, or centers which are where people are working in a focused way. What they mean is a place where people can go and chill out with other friends and
vibe together.
Yeah, vibe together. Exactly. So that's actually, but that is actually the system trying to co-opt leftist politics, trying to integrate it into its system of power. And essentially what the anarchist movement has become is a tool that is used by the state or the system to leverage, as a way of extending its influence. And you can see that now how and the Antifa is a very good example, because I remember I would go up to Antifa people and I'd go okay, so what's your philosophy? And they would go, we're against fascism. I'd be like, okay, and? So that was it. That's their entire philosophy. And so, what the state essentially does is it creates controlled opposition. And sometimes you might have these protests, or I don't know, rallies where you've got the right-wing nationalists and you've got the Antifa, and they're fighting each other, but it's a lot of the guys are the same. When you actually look, it's people there looking for a fight, basically, and it's a lot of the times very manipulated. So so this is something that we have to look within ourselves. And if you actually look at the old left and old kind of music or culture that they put out, artwork, it was actually very beautiful. It was it had it had a very kind of coherency about it. For example, the old kind of anarchist in Spain, if you listen to their music, it's singing about liberty and the future, and it's very collective. So, but if you look at the for example, the anarchist music now, it's all very negative. It's just about resentment against power, against about tearing or burning things down. So that's there has been something that's happened to the anarchist movement, that the anarchist movement has not been able to formulate so first of all, they especially with the syndicalists, they did have a collective way of organizing, but then over time these movements have become more individualist, and that individualism or hyper individualism has become a politics around me, or my identity, or my concerns, as opposed to formulating a shared vision of society, that we all kind of achieve consensus around, and we kind of like in a directed way work to achieve that vision, and also try to bring in other groups from all around the society into that. So in the Russian Revolution, we actually had the first uprising by the Kronstadt guards, or by the I think it was the Black Guards, but they there was like 10,000 of them, and they actually went in the streets, and they actually went past Lenin's house, and they said to Lenin, like, hey, come on, like, we're doing the revolution, like, come join us. And Lenin was like, guys, I think I'll sit this one out, like, I'll let you go on ahead. So they went and they did that, and you know, they took over the provisional government, and the thing is, like, nothing changed. The old power structures remained. So then, and a lot of them ended up being repressed as well. But then the second revolution, the November Revolution, this time was a very big conversation inside of Lenin's party. And in the end, Lenin, you know, he said, okay, we're doing the revolution, and so we're going to execute on it. And what happened, so there was only 100 of them, 100 like well-trained communists, you know, acting in a coherent way, sharing a singular vision. And they went and they were able, and then they had like a plan, a strategy. They were like, we're going to capture this bridge, we're going to do this. And they were also able to rally like other groups in society behind them and like direct that energy. And they ended up taking over first Petrograd, and then, you know, like, and then slowly expanding over all of Russia. So that was the movement that actually ended up making the Russian Revolution, not the kind of leaderless or like undirected like mass movement beforehand. Mm-hmm. And the same thing you can see as well in the Spanish Civil War, where the anarchists were fighting these huge battles which lasted many days, and many people would die, to capture a town that ultimately had no strategic significance. And then they would capture this town, and it would be a huge cost of life, but like ultimately like did not like achieve like any goal. And then later, that was a pretext for the communists to come afterwards and say, okay, we're going to, you know, like, we're going to make like a professional army and organize, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's great. That was like a good, like, good. 20 minutes of conversation that we can take. As I think with that amount, people can really know your ideas and like the type of person you are. Uh-huh. But maybe now, could you give us just like a quick introduction to yourself? Some people may know, some people may not, and like your history. You're sort of like one of the original, like one of the very first characters in the sort of like crypto world and like the beginnings of Bitcoin and that movement. So I'm curious if you could introduce your story of how you got into it and like viewing the developments from the beginning and up till now.
Yeah, so hello everyone. I've been in open source. I've been an open source software development. I've been an open source software developer for nearly 20 years. I've also been involved in like left politics for a long time. I also was a professional poker player for 2 years. That was right before I got into Bitcoin. I was involved heavily. I was like one of the first 5 Bitcoin developers in Bitcoin's early history. I organized the first 2 Bitcoin conferences. I ran one of the biggest exchanges on the market, which was Intersango. It was second biggest by volume. And also participated heavily in Bitcoin development, wrote a very fast Bitcoin full node, which still exists today, which is LibBitcoin. I also was involved in cooperatives, the Catalan cooperative, and also other anarchist projects in Spain, like Calafo. And then also I was in Rojava in the YPG in early 2015 for 3.5 months on the front line. And then I've been also in Rojava for 3 years working on economics projects. And also I've been a developer or researcher for cryptography, mainly focused around anonymous techniques.
So I think a really, really interesting part about your history is that, you're in like heavy contact with all of these people who would be considered like, the crypto, like anarcho-capitalists, and you're sort of, from what I understand, like at least a part of like their milieu a little bit, or like you were in interaction with them. So like what was it like, the atmosphere, the feeling, and like the political tendencies in the beginning of this space?
Yeah,
were you in the minorities? Like
no, not at all. No, actually, in the early days of Bitcoin, there was, I'd say there were like 3 major kind of blocks. There was the open source tendency, which is what I kind of hail from. There was the Austrian economics tendency.
Yeah.
And there was the cypherpunk crypto anarchy tendency.
I feel like people sometimes like assume that those two are the same.
Yeah, then which one?
The second, the last two, crypto anarchy and like Austrian.
Yeah, no, they're very different. So yeah, the Austrian economics guys were something that was kind of new to me, because I never knew about like Austrian economics and that kind of ideology. But the cypherpunks, or the kind of crypto anarchists, like overlap with the open source communities and also P2P ideology, which at that time was kind of on the way down. It reached its peak around the early 2000s with BitTorrent, and then the spin-offs such as like the Pirate Bay, and then all the like kind of mass protests that happened like in like Georgia, Ukraine, Belarus, other countries, which ultimately led also as well to the Arab Spring. But Bitcoin kind of came on the tail end of that, and I'd say maybe it's like kind of reinvigorated that kind of ideology as well, which is like the whole kind of swarm politics, P2P, decentralization kind of stuff. But the free software, open source ideology is slightly different, because it's more about it's more about the aspect that technology is fundamental to human society, and therefore necessitate that everybody has free access to that technology. So we also see that aspect at play in cryptocurrency, where now the question of open finance and like the ability of what it's called money Legos to interoperate.
Yeah.
So that tendency strongly comes from the free software movement. Austrian economics is concerned with sound money, and actually, they have some good points, especially their critique of the central bank. But their problem is that they're trapped inside of the same logic of the kind of system that they're fighting against. So which is neoclassical or neoliberalist economics.
Yeah. Could you talk a bit about actually your experience in Rojava and like trying, I guess, the experience of like thinking about using crypto in like a very, very, a very, very like specific type of high stress, I would imagine, like war situation. What was, and for like I mean, yeah, people don't know. I mean, Rojava is like a left-wing anarchist movements in northern Syria for the Kurdish people.
Yeah, so first of all, like Rojava is like a region of 5 million people, so it's like bigger than the population of Estonia. So it's a very large, like kind of region. I'd say it's like 400 or 500 kilometers across and like about the same down. So and currently Syria is split into two parts. The northern part, which is Rojava or like North Syria, and the southern part, which is the Assad government, the Syrian government, which is actually a national socialist ideology. They're literally fascists, and so that's a problem. That's also kind of what has. So the Middle East in general, they. With the age of modernity, they recognized that they needed to adapt. The way that they adapt was by copying Western nation states. So we ended up in the Middle East with these very artificial states with borders that do not correspond to communities that already exist, and borders that like cut right through them. Whereas the Middle East have like this very old kind of fabric that like extends between many different like communities that that often coexist in the same geography or territory, and so these centralized states essentially just copied European states, and that's why there's this tendency to authoritarianism and dictators, precisely because when a state exists in a context where it's not adapted to that context, the tendency of the state is to centralize and create a stronger power apparatus to maintain its power. So this is kind of the problem with, for example, Syria, and what has led to disenfranchisement of large section of the population, which has also led to its instability and its inability to kind of meet the needs or the specific contexts of different groups in the society. So, and if you actually look at the flag of the Syrian Social Nationalist Party, which is the main political party in Assad's government, it's actually a swastika. It's actually like a Nazi. Yeah, it's like a Nazi swastika. But then like Rojava has like a very different politics, which is very unique and interesting, and also can add a lot of value to anarchist thought. In fact, I think like substantially offer value and should be required reading for every person that's interested in not just in anarchism but in politics in general. It's also the most politically interesting region or movement in the world right now. So it's kind of strange the lack of interest or focus that it's got by academics as well, which really kind of shows how insular or cut off Western thought has become from the actual realities of the world, and how Western thought has an inability to actually like meet the needs of like global human society that's struggling with crises of like ecology or technological development or terrorist movements, So in terms of Rojava, like early or late 2014, I was reading about the PKK on the internet, and was reading about Öcalan's works, and I found them very interesting and compelling, particularly what he said about economy. Then I discovered also that they had a region in North Syria. That was before ISIS attacked Kobani. And then I was kind of following it every single day. I became very invested in that kind of fight, in the outcome of that fight. And then at some point, like, I decided that, like, I had to kind of go and kind of see for myself, also like offer like any help that would be needed. At the time, like, the way of getting there was like very difficult. Like, now it's a lot different. It's like a lot more, things are like becoming a lot more formalized. So I went to the YPG. I served in the YPG. I was on the front for some time. There was a few gun battles, but like most of the time just smoking cigarettes, sitting around drinking tea. It was very boring.
I think people have this idea that like war and the military is like always like very action packed.
No, it's not. It's like
quite boring.
99% like just literally getting 3 hours of sleep every night, 4 hours, and just spending the whole night staring at pitch black, like just pitch black, nothing happening.
Yeah.
And then randomly it would be like suddenly everybody's rushing to get their shoes on because there's like an attack or something. Like one of the biggest attacks that I was in, I was literally about to walk outside the base in the no man's land, and then like all these machine guns, but I literally went back to get my jacket, and then like all these machine guns from ISIS started firing, but it's actually kind of exhilarating as well. Like, people like running around, and there's like bullets flying everywhere. And it's kind of like a movie as well. And it's also something that like is very vivid. So I still remember it like very clearly, like it was like yesterday. Yeah. So it sticks with you for a long time. But the tragedy of war as well is that people die. And it's sad, like especially like when good people die, like so and there was a lot of very good people, and they're often the people to die first as well, because they're the ones that are like the best. So then I like left from the military. I went to serve in the economics committee because that's like more my kind of work. There's like there's no there's no shortage of soldiers, and actually that's not what they need. What they need in Rojava is actually science and technology. That's like their main concern right now. So anyway, that was 2015. 2015 was a very special time because everywhere you went in society, everybody was engaged with the kind of revolution. There was a lot of like enthusiasm, a lot of energy, like really smart people engaged in this thing, but over time, so the thing is like the war is on the front line. The war is not in the cities. So cities is just like a normal third world country, like a normal life. But the problem is the struggle of the war situation is, for example, when you have an embargo, it drives the price of goods up. So it makes it expensive for normal people to like afford basic necessities, and like puts a lot of stress on the economy. In particular, now Turkey is building dams that cut off the water supply. So there's a problem with water, and what people are doing is they're digging wells. And the problem with the wells is that the water level drops, and the more the water level drops, the more the land which is used to grow wheat that people eat turns into desert. And then, like, you can't grow anything on desert, basically. So that's a huge problem now with the water supply. And sometimes there's water shortages in certain areas. Like, you don't, like, it depends where you are. Like, some places there's no problem with water, but then some cities, like, a lot of people are moving out of Hasaka, which is one big city, because there's like very little water. Sometimes for days, the like taps don't have water. And so that's kind of annoying. And then in terms of electricity as well, the electrical grid needs to be upgraded. But they have like a ton of oil. But the problem is they can't like really export that oil. So so there's a lot of difficulty in that aspect, but economically as well. So if they manage to get out of this war situation and they manage to kind of have a stable political entity, then they can be very successful as a nation. But the philosophy of the movement in Rojava has a lot of soft power. And if they manage to sustain long term, they have the potential to infiltrate and influence the wider Middle East. And so Rojava, as a small statelet of like 5 million people, could expand to become like a civilization. The Kurds themselves are in Iraq, in Iran, in Turkey, and also Syria. So that by itself is a very big piece of land.
It seems like that's a very tough situation. If you want, like, you have to deal with 4 or 5 different states that are breaking your community up.
Yeah, that was actually engineered deliberately by Western states. Actually, there's a quote by Winston Churchill where he was saying that he's in favor of gassing the Kurds.
Jesus.
Because and even my dad, who's from Iran, I remember when I asked him about Kurds, he said, they're troublemakers. So there's this perception by everyone in the Middle East that the Kurds, they just cause problems for people. They need to kind of like behave and like put up with their their lot that they've been given. But they were actually split between 4 states as a way of weakening them. And it kind of worked in the beginning, but it's just led to like bigger problems in the longer term.
Right.
So it's this kind of like short-term opportunistic thinking that in general, not just in the Middle East, but everywhere in the world, has led to the deep social inequalities and like divisions in society. So another good example is the Israeli-Palestine conflict, where people always say like, should there be a one-party state? Should there be a two-party state? But the thing is, nobody actually asks the question like, what about a no state solution? Which like who designed this crappy political system where different groups within different nations within a society are vying to fight for singular power? Like, so that's more an indictment of the kind of political structure or the system than it is about the kind of reality of like the nations as they exist. The actual state or political system of governance should reflect the local realities, not the other way around. So that's an issue.
Yeah. And so we talked about this a little bit before, but for me, like, Rojava is really like a very interesting example, or like political movements, like events happening in history at this moment, of like putting real anarchist, like non-state practices into work to a certain extent. And so you would think that like crypto people who profess to be anti-state a lot of the times, or like, you would think that they would be interested in Rojava. But what's been your experience when talking with people like these crypto people about Rojava and about the situation there?
Yeah, so I've been long time going to crypto conferences and talking about Rojava and talking about politics and trying to get people invested or interested, telling them, look, this is like an opportunity to do something meaningful. Instead, like the main interests of people. So now, the El Salvador thing, which is like, he's like a gangster, like associated with like cartels and mafia. So that's like, okay. Offshores, like having a boat in the middle of the ocean, I don't know if you read that story where these Bitcoiners bought like a $20 million cruise liner, and they actually didn't realize that cruise liners are one of the most regulated industries in the world. So it didn't really work out. I think like a lot of the kind of what do you call it, like seasteading people are gonna come to this realization that no, you can't just have a boat in the middle of the ocean and be left alone. And also the Ethereum people, like I know Vitalik like a long time. I was telling all the ETH Foundation of people about Rojava. I was talking about it at the conferences. For the kind of reaction I got from them was felt like them we want to change things, but not change things too much. Yeah. So they went all into this like radical markets, which is completely institutional liberal politics. They talk at the WEF and Davos and all that. And then even more shockingly, seeing that members of the ETH community were going to North Korea to talk to a dictator about ETH and not engaging with Rojava. So I don't know, honestly, I don't know what is up with people and how they're thinking or what their reasoning is. There's something definitely very confused going on,
Yeah. It seems like they're afraid of making a political statements. Like
But why were they going to North Korea to talk to a dictatorship about ETH? What was that about?
I feel like it was, I don't know the full story, but I get the impression that it was just like this one guy sort of had given the opportunity to go talk to them.
I've given them plenty of opportunities to go to Rojava. And
I'm sure.
I actually put them on the telephone with people from the administration and, like managing the economy and stuff, but never really seemed to spark their interest.
Right.
So why?
Even though it's like the perfect example of what they're professing into practice, it seems to be a point missing. I don't know, for some reason it's I get the impression that a lot of ETH people want mainstream adoption, so they're afraid of for being too political and actually doing what they're professing rather than because there is that. I think like you mentioned before, it's language that they're using that sounds very good, but it's not something that they want to actually live, or maybe there's a huge hesitation to actually live to a certain degree.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. There's very big disconnect between professed ideas and practice.
No. Is there any? So the big reason that you're here in Lisbon and presented at Liscon was because you started you announced your new project, DarkFi.
Yeah, well, it's more it's not a single project.
Right.
It's more like a kind of community that we're creating.
So DarkFi, as far as I understand, it's a way to anonymously be able to swap assets across chains, and it has its own sort of blockchain layer in the middle of it that's going to help facilitate the anonymity and help facilitate these cross-chain swaps. But could you maybe expand a little bit more what and why we need? You think we need something like DarkFi?
Yeah. So it's not a way to swap assets between different chains. It's actually an environment or a kind of toolkit for people to create anonymous applications, leveraging like very like novel cryptography techniques such as ZK and other techniques as well. When normally before in the past, when I wanted to create a cryptographic application, what I'd have to do is I'd have to have a good knowledge of cryptography, and I'd have to think how to combine different techniques to create an application. And then sometimes, it would be impossible to create that cryptographic schema. And other times it might be very slow. But like with, for example, ZK now, we have a very generic set of tooling that opens up an entirely new design space of applications that weren't before possible. And there are several like projects that are like trying to create environments for people to create ZK applications, for example, Alio, Aztec, and others. However, they are not, there's like a certain subset of that space that they are not going to touch or deal with, but we are deliberately, we actually see them as like good things to help bring to life or realize.
Right.
And I think there's like a serious desire within the crypto community to see this design space realized.
Yeah. It's something that I feel like in the beginning it was like really considered like really important. I mean, people used to think that like Bitcoin transactions were anonymous and like, but now it's sort of become, now I'm afraid a bit that like blockchains and crypto is sort of becoming actually the like perfect surveillance tool to a certain degree.
Yeah, there are some weird things happening, like the WorldCoin orb, where people are like scanning their eyes. Yeah.
That's the like the worst example of it.
But even Kleros, if you look at the EthCC Kleros talk, the actual talk by Federico, he's saying, he starts talking about the Panopticon. And he goes, well, actually, the interpretation by Foucault of the Panopticon was incomplete, because actually it was a good thing, because the original vision of the Panopticon was that anybody can go into the tower and anybody can like watch the people watching the prisoners. Mm-hmm. And so therefore it's like a decentralized form of surveillance. Mm-hmm. And there's the strange thing, and that kind of thinking actually comes out of the whole like English movement, where, for example, the school system, which in England was like designed based off of the factory like model, where you put kids in and you like manufacture them into being workers. And I absolutely hated school in England. It was so boring. It was like, we basically just learned or were indoctrinated in our history lessons into the memorizing the wives of like Henry VIII or like the lineage of kings and all the battles that they fought. Yeah. Like really, we didn't learn about Celtic history. We didn't learn about like Cromwell's civil war. We didn't learn about the Enlightenment or Renaissance. We didn't learn anything. We just learned about the kings and queens of England. That was our history, basically. And England has a reputation for having like really bad education. And that's I think deliberately as a consequence out of that movement. And also the Garden Cities movement, which was a way of like central planning people's lives in a city and designing the city and the way people interact, which and then also B.F. Skinner is also comes out of that movement. B.F. Skinner did all this research into for example the Skinner box, which was showing that you can actually instead of using negative reinforcement like pain or punishment, you can actually use positive reinforcement to get pigeons to behave a certain way. And so they thought this was like a cool thing to like apply to human beings. And so that's kind of like what we have today with, or the kind of ways that like perception is like engineered in society, and has created this like widespread atmosphere of distrust where like nobody trusts the system, and has actually led to the instability of the system. So a lot of ETH people are like also of that persuasion where they're really into like positivism, and they're really like, the way that they see this technology is a way to like engineer like an optimal society according to logic. And we actually reject that type of thinking. So instead, like, we are interested in like, we have like a certain political ideal around democratic politics, or like empowerment of society and the nations and people in them. And therefore we want to empower autonomy and individuation and give people the tooling to like enlarge human society and the social relations between people. And the way that we see politics is as the activities that concern interests of society, such as like well-being, security, and freedom. And the ideal of politics is to multiply public spaces. So in particular DAOs and DeFi are very interesting, because the whole ETH Foundation had this kind of politics oriented around like radical markets and human social engineering, and the whole new emergent space of DeFi has kind of rejected that with a resounding no. And instead we're seeing this new emergent politics, which is very much in line with the thought of like Öcalan's politics emerging inside of that. They're like almost a perfect fit. You know, it's like, we're, in terms of like DarkFi, we're not coming and dictating top down what the politics should be. Instead, we have been observing for a long time what are the natural underlying tendencies of the community, which the community in some ways you can say is an expression of the kind of democratic nation that exists all throughout history, and is that democratic tendency within technology about human empowerment. So what we merely want to do is to enlarge that and to add richness and develop it. So that's why also in particular the concept of agorism, we want to kind of bring it back to the forefront, because agorism is a very key philosophy in the early history of Bitcoin, like a very important one. A lot of the early Bitcoin talk community, like I mentioned, there were the crypto anarchists, and there was the Austrian economists and the open source people. The intersection of all three of those communities is agorist philosophy, and agorists were very common in 2010, 2011. In fact, Ross Ulbricht, who founded Silk Road, was an agorist, and his favorite novel alongside Night was about a group of revolutionary free market cadre in the US who overthrow the US government through what is termed in agorist philosophy counter-economics. Counter-economics is like free market trade that undermines the state, and you know, like today when I think I was in Tenerife when I was walking around, and I saw like a Bitcoin shop, and it was just random shop in a shopping mall, and it had like all these posters on the wall with like slogans and the anonymous mask, and it's so uncanny how similar the reality is to the novel. Like, we're actually like living the reality of that novel. Like, it's actually like transpiring in front of us. So I think that is like a really good source of inspiration. If we go back and we look at the things that the agorists were saying, because agorism is essentially is a kind of like democratic economics that can be used to like pre-configure like economic relations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with agorism, we talked about this before, but like I get the feeling is that agorism itself, at least like the original philosophy, was hard to say if it was like necessarily left or right, or like pro or anti-capitalist to a certain extent, I think. But at the same time, it feels like the right-wing agorists have sort of like they have a larger voice than maybe like the left-wing one.
Yeah, well, agorism is an idea or a concept that was put forward by Samuel Konkin, but it also kind of fits within the tradition of left-wing market anarchism, but it also incorporates tendencies from right-wing libertarianism. So the thing is that philosophies are rarely stagnant when they are alive. So in some ways, left and right are categories that were invented, I don't know, 300 years ago or 400 years ago. And the left has become, at least the conception of the left has become a kind of enclosure, and the right as well, for certain sets of issues, which may or may not correspond to socialist or socialism. Right. as a ideology,
like the orthodox sense, I guess.
Yeah, in the orthodox sense. So I'm very much more towards the orthodox, or at least original conception of socialism. Which does not singularly include Marx, but it incorporates like other thinkers. So socialism is about public means of production. And can also include concepts of cooperatives and so on. So the socialists, including the communists, if you look, for example, the communists, the Soviet Union had I think it was the 12 precepts for the moral builder of communism, which is kind of like a 10 commandments for communists. And there was also Che Guevara's idea of the new socialist man as like an ideal. So socialism in its root was concerned with morality and politicizing society. So but the modern left is actually in some ways like anti-morality. So
really, my impression, I feel like it's the opposite maybe a bit. Whenever I read Marx, I feel like he's not for morality, and that sort of liberal morality and like moralism has sort of infected large parts of the left, and I feel like that's like a reason why a lot of the left doesn't want to consider or like really take seriously like the crypto space or the blockchain space, because they feel like morally it's reprehensible because it's associated with like right-wing elements, and it's only for like I don't know, doing illegal things or something like that.
I would say that is probably because the left has lost philosophical sophistication. So it's become very dogmatic, and dogma usually happens as a consequence of like a kind of movement becoming degraded,
stagnant.
And so that's why you see, for example, liberals in the US, liberals used to be the kind of vanguard of free speech, now are actually they're actually like very much in favor of policing speech, and also preventing certain types of speech as well. So They've become very anti-free speech. And I feel like that kind of dogmatism usually arises out of weakness.
Yeah.
Because you are unable to, because I honestly believe that humans intrinsically, like you have to, the only way that you can't coerce someone intrinsically, you have to convince them through the power of persuasion. And the left has lost that power, and because their philosophy is not as strong as it once used to be. It used to be, the left's philosophy used to be very strong, and maybe in some ways they were successful in attaining in power. But what the left needs to kind of undergo is like a philosophical like revival or transformation. And that's why I'm kind of directing the left to look at Öcalan's works and seriously consider the work of Öcalan alongside other thinkers like Richard Werner and Lewis Mumford. The problem is a lot of like engagement with Rojava by the left so far has often been on the kind of pretext of going, oh look, it's a social anarchist revolution, we accept it into our domain, as opposed to going, oh wow, they've like actually this movement has like achieved some some like breakthrough. What can we learn from that, or like how can we understand how that thing works? And it, even when people like they want to understand Rojava or they want to learn about Rojava, for some reason people don't seem to engage with Öcalan's works. So for example, there are these books called like Rojava, where when you look at the book inside, it's like it says like about Rojava or something. Inside the book, it's got like these diagrams and explanations of like the structures of the institutions, and like this, there's this body and it does this thing, and there's this organization, and this is how the whole thing is structured. And the thing is like that is the equivalent of going, if you want to understand Christianity, understanding the structure of the churches and like the structure of power, instead of like actually reading the Bible, like trying to understand like what the teachings of that philosophy are actually saying. So that's why it's like very important for people to like read Manifesto for a Democratic Civilization, which are the actual works of Öcalan, that actually like where he does his like analysis, and actually come out of the 2000s when he was captured, and then like came to this realization that there had to be a big change in the PKK, because what happened with the PKK was they originally were an organization that was fighting for de jure independence to get a nation state for Kurds.
This is like within Turkey.
Within Turkey, yeah. But then the big shift in focus was when Öcalan kind of realized that the nation, the Middle East, it's a very old culture. It's the birthplace of human civilization. The cradle of civilization was ancient Mesopotamia or Sumer. Also, it's the origin of the world's major religions and philosophies. It's a place where many different ethnicities and religions have been living side by side, often on the same territory for thousands of years. So, you can't apply like a nation state thinking to that kind of society. In fact, that is the problem that's caused all these problems. So that's why they and they shifted their focus away from fighting for like a single nation state to instead like actually what we should be nurturing are these kind of parallel societies, de facto autonomy.
I'm really curious to hear, actually, going back to privacy, like what do you think is like the case for like taking privacy seriously on the left? For me, like what comes to mind first is that like if you actually want to challenge capitalist institutions, like privacy is just like a very basic thing you have to consider, especially digital privacy, just considering that the vast majority of our interactions happen online, and we live in a globalized world. Like it's using the internet and these telecommunication technologies is like an important thing for organization, and like in a world where giant corporations that are very friendly with very large states, like it's very easy for them, if they know all of your plans from the beginning, then it's sort of like moot, right? It doesn't really like matter what you're doing. They can sort of like already be there and sabotage whatever you want to do, which is like kind of part of the problems of like these revolutionary movements in the 60s and 70s, for example, where there were, of course, then they had just had like some CIA spy who like pretended to be a communist and like entered the organization, somehow was able to give information to the CIA or the state security apparatus and such.
Yeah, so every kind of revolutionary movement have to nurture a parallel society as the kind of precursor, which kind of create the seed of the new kind of society that will kind of displace the current power structures.
Yeah.
And these kind of parallel societies, they offer pockets of freedom, which like nurture ideologies of resistance and like form the basis of the new society. Like totalitarianism as a force, you cannot defeat it through compliance. Like whenever you like comply with totalitarianism, it only kind of like emboldens it as a system. And like, for example, Stalin, he only really started his purges much later, once all the opposition had been kind of nullified. And then he actually felt like he was strong enough to start like going after everybody else. So, and that happens like when the kind of rulers, they're like no longer afraid. That's when totalitarian terror is unleashed. So, it never, so like the compliance actually never leads to like normality. And therefore like resistance is kind of essential to counter like the rise of totalitarian rule. And the whole point of parallel societies is that they exist free from coercion and allow this like democratic politics to kind of nurture. And we see it in every revolution. It's like the broad base of popular support. Like for example, I was talking about the fascist squad in Italy. One of the other things that they have been doing, the fascist parties in Italy, is they provide healthcare and like food and social services.
Yeah.
And in the video, the local people are saying that, oh, the communists used to offer this, but now it's the fascists that are offering this to us.
Yeah.
So when it comes to anonymity, a lot of anonymity or privacy is often framed in terms of like going, oh, I don't want to, pay taxes, or like I want to be free from the state. I'm less interested in that. Like the interest that I have is all these concepts I was talking about, like DAOs and DeFis. The power and capital monopolies, or the state and capitalism, is going to come after these nascent organizational structures that are emerging. And therefore it's essential for us to create the means of self-defense such that those new parallel organizational structures that are emerging can prosper and thrive, because they're they're actually bringing something that's very useful and needed, because, for example, technology absolutely rules modern society, like absolutely plays a key role. And
like digital technology, like
yeah,
the internet.
exactly.
Like,
yeah, that's why I meant by technology. But yeah, there is more to technology than computers. But yeah, I mean digital technology, and therefore, like, the only way that we can, and revolutionary movements in general, usually the ones that succeed make the best use of technology. Like, technological use of technology is usually a key to success. So,
and it's not even. I think it's not even about like having like quote unquote better technology. It's also like the use of it. If you look at, I mean, the Vietnam War, Vietnam won with significantly less, power than the U.S. did.
that's
And
true.
they were able to utilize, I mean, just everything. I mean, if you consider just like their tunneling system, I mean, it's also a technology to a certain extent.
Yeah, well, there's a story in ancient history of the Assyrian king. Assyria was like the first dictatorship in history, and Kawa was this is a Kurdish mythology. He was a blacksmith, and he had the technology of iron working tools, or his blacksmith, and he taught all the surrounding tribes how to make weapons, and that became the basis. And they basically stockpiled weapons, and then to signal the start of the revolution, they lit fires on the hills, which was an early form of telecommunications, and that like signaled the beginning of the rebellion. So, for example, technology it plays such a crucial role, and therefore, like, it's very essential that we have access to technology. Like, we are not just like consuming the technology, but we are controlling or steering the technology. And when I say we, I don't mean like some subset of like specialist or elite. I mean the society in general. For example, in ancient Greece, they had they had like steam power, they had electronics, they had hydroponics, they even had like computers, like mechanical computers. They had cryptography. They had a lot of very advanced science and technology. They never had like a scientific revolution or an industrial revolution, because the people who were developing the science and technology, they were an elite, and the application of that knowledge that they were developing was often just like, the only application really was to make toys to entertain kings. And the end result of that was the Library of Alexandria became this symbol of oppression and ended up being burnt down by the poor Christian hordes. It's very important that the science as a tool and technology doesn't become a tool of the oppressors, but also the society or the democratic nation has access to these tools of power, and is also part of the discourse that is shaping their development and their evolution. And so that's why for like many years, like I was involved in free software movement. But the biggest problem with free software movement is we did not have funding. There was no economic model behind it. But like now and so like a lot of the technology that's being developed now is based around, exploiting users using this like low value ad-based model where people just like click ads. And the consequence of that is the development of this like surveillance megastructure, this architecture of oppression, which is leading to better and better developments of AIs. In fact, like now with the drones as well, what they can do is they can fill the sky with drones, such that it's impossible for people to move on the land. So that in the past, if a state became too oppressive, you at least had the means of self-defense to like resist physically the coercion. But like now, this like last avenue of freedom is being taken away from us, and part of that is the whole kind of digital internet big tech economy that's like powering this like this like war on society, this societal genocide apparatus. So all these techniques like DeFi and cryptography are the means by which we can like defend like our spaces of freedom, like by which we can ensure the integrity of like our politics and our expression.
Yeah. We've both been here in Lisbon and like checking out all of these different events happening, largely around Ethereum, largely around, I mean, you could say crypto in general. But I was just curious about if you have any like, high level thoughts on like the current state of the crypto world, like given your, I mean, knowledge and like just being involved since the very beginning, has it panned out in the way that you thought it would? Are there any like big surprises, things that happened sooner or later than you thought it would?
Well, yeah, they're absolutely like when I came into Bitcoin in 2010, I was like, this is incredibly important. I'm 100% in for the next 10 years, 20 years, like no questions. But I did not expect it to get as big as it's got. Like I expected it would take like the kind of 2-year mark that we got to, I expected would take 10 years or longer or 20 years.
Yeah.
So that happened very quickly. I couldn't, and the level that we've reached now is like surprising.
Yeah.
And so that's been completely unexpected. In terms of the market in general, I sense there has been like a lot of development of technique, but at the same time, there's also some stagnation, and to break out of this stagnation, it's necessary to have a compelling narrative that can pull people together. There are several narratives that have been vying for like competition, but nothing I think really that's like strong enough to like propel this kind of space forward. So that's kind of where I think we kind of fit in. I think we actually bring substantial value to the narrative discourse.
Yeah. Reviving the you mentioned agorism quite a bit in the middle of, because I think if you know a little bit of like left-wing politics, like listening to your like, I think it was like 10-20 minutes talk before giving the demo of DarkFi, it was very clear that it was a very political statement you were making as well, which was interesting, like juxtaposed with like, you had the advent of like consensus and like another stage and like, some bullshit DeFi protocol on the side over there. We're just talking about, how you can like increase your APY or whatever like that. So it was a very, I think people were really interested to hear that as well, that political message, because I think people, especially if they were there in the earlier stages, I think it was much more, like the political nature of it was much more clear. And now it's sort of become, of course, like a fair amount of people who are here for like making money, to be frank.
Yeah, well, a lot of those people that are there for making money, they're gonna just exit early and short their own potential because they're just looking to make a quick buck. But those of us that are like steadfast, we're in for the risky game, but also the bigger gains, so to speak, but less tangible gains.
Yeah.
There's something bigger that waits on the horizon.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. Maybe just to end it off, if you want to tell people where they can keep up with you and like the next developments of DarkFi.
Yeah, we have a chat that people should join. But you can just go on the website dark.fi, like dark.fi, and there's a link there called community, and it has everything on there.
Well, thanks a lot again for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.